Okay, so today's topic is potatoes. So as I mentioned, these are an ancient crop. They've been around for a very long time, and they're actually very easy to grow if you know what you're doing. Now, there are some factors that will work against you. Potatoes are a crop that are known to get some diseases and pests, but as if you're doing all the pre-work ahead of time to try to mitigate those problems, then you're likely going to have a successful crop. The publication that I'm going to always recommend when we do these is the Kansas Garden Guide. You're always going to find great information here. Potatoes can be found on pages 170 through 171. Another great publication that I found is with UMN Extension. Again, it's just growing potatoes in home gardens. And actually, if you just search potatoes, .edu on any search engine, you're going to find a bunch of great publications from several extension sources on growing potatoes. Finding ones that are closer to Kansas and Missouri are going to be a little bit more applicable to us, specifically because they've been written to have that information that deals with our environmental conditions. But there's lots of great information out there. So at a glance, we are going to talk about a couple of key factors here with your potatoes. Often when you are talking about potatoes, they are going to be referred to as Irish potatoes. And they do this specifically to differentiate between sweet potatoes and the potatoes that we're discussing today, right? So there's some confusion there sometimes when people are, specifically in the grower world. And the Irish is a good way to designate that. And they're not actually Irish, which is funny, but we'll talk about that at the end of this. These are half-hardy tubers. So what I mean by tuber is it's actually part of a modified stem. That is the physiological component to the plant that is happening there. So it is part of the stem that's growing underground, and it's meant to be a carbohydrate storage. And they are half-hardy because they do not handle cold well. This is mostly a warm season crop. They also like fertile soil, but they don't like soil that has too much nitrogen because they're going to overproduce some foliage and not produce on the tubers like you're wanting them to. They also need well-draining soil because they're going to rot otherwise, and they need high organic matter because that's going to help have that correct amount of moisture. There are many types and varieties of potatoes as well, which is something we're going to briefly discuss. So as you can see here, there's lots of different types of potatoes out there. You see them all in the store. White potatoes are actually going to be your most common. Most of the varieties, or many of the varieties you can find, are going to be white potatoes. These have a very, diverse starch to them and a very thin skin, so they're very popular. Russets are your most hardy of potatoes, but they're actually a bit difficult to grow out here because they just don't like our environmental conditions very much. But these are going to be, when I say hardy, they're going to be the most, they can handle the most abuse when you're working with them in the garden. They are some massive potatoes, and they have very, very thick skins to them. Your yellow potatoes are very similar to your white potatoes, but the starches are a little bit creamier, butterier, if that's a word. And your red potatoes, those are known for holding their form a little bit better. So those are ones you can actually chop up and throw whole into dishes. And your blue-purple potatoes are actually becoming a lot more popular in recent years. And these are typically used in cookings where you need a thicker starch, because these ones, their starches to them are very, very dense. So all these potatoes, when you're considering varieties that you want to be using, you want to be considering what its ultimate purpose is going to be. If you're wanting just a general potato that can be used in many different ways, then your russets are going to probably be your best bet. If you're wanting something that doesn't have to be peeled, then your whites or yellows or reds might be something good. And again, those purple blues, they've got their uses in culinary dishes, which Chelsea will talk about. So some other considerations, again, you want fertile, well-draining soil. So they do need a lot of fertilizer, even though they don't like a lot of nitrogen. They prefer soil temperatures that are at 60 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So April to early May, right now is the best time to be planting them in the spring. If you're going to be doing a fall crop, you can plant them in July, but what you're going to need to do is be planting them a lot deeper, which we'll talk about in a bit. And when you are doing a fall crop, you need to keep in mind that if you live in northern Kansas, it is much more likely to actually be successful. If you live in southern Kansas, with the fluctuations in temperatures they have in fall, it's going to kind of fight you as far as success goes. And you want to start your plants from certified disease-free seed potatoes, not just potatoes. And we'll talk about that here. So seed potatoes are your sources for your potatoes. These are grown from the previous season's tubers. And essentially what you do is you take the potato and you cut them into pieces, and you try to designate those pieces a certain number of eyes. So the eyes are those rooty growths that you see in the photo here. Generally, when you're making those cuttings, you want them to be about an inch and a half wide or 2 ounces. And you want 3 to 4 eyes, if you can manage it, on those pieces. Then you plant those pieces in a line with those eyes facing upward. And if you cut them to that size, at least, they should have enough carbohydrate storage in there to generate enough root growth for them to establish. You do want to refrain from using grocery store potatoes when you do this. I know a lot of people would like to just go to the grocery store and buy some, or especially if you don't know where to get seed potatoes or how to acquire them. But there are many diseases that can exist on your store potatoes that will show no symptoms. So you don't want those to be going into your garden. That's why you want your certified disease-free seed potatoes, which you can usually find in most local garden centers. So as far as spacing of your seed potatoes goes, you want to take your cuttings, you want to plant them about 1 foot apart each. So you're giving each plant at least 6 inches in each direction to grow. Then your rows themselves should be about 3 feet apart, because you're going to need to get between your rows for the mounding, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you are planting in the spring, like right now, 2 inches deep is plenty deep. And then, as I mentioned, for fall, you're going to want to be planting deeper because they do like that cooler soil. So in July, when you're planting for the fall, it's not going to be quite cool soil. So you need to be planting about 4 inches to 5 inches deep. As far as plant care goes, so hilling and ridging is very essential when you're growing your potatoes, as I had mentioned a minute here ago. So you want to do this because it encourages tuber development and it protects them from sunburn. So your tubers are going to be produced along the stem of the plants. Remember, your potato plant is a vine plant, but there's a stem there. So as you are gradually building up these mounds over the season and bringing more and more soil against the stem, you are encouraging more tubers to develop on that stem. Also, you can incur sunburn on your potatoes because they like to grow close to the surface. So when you are bringing that soil up, you are covering them up and preventing that sunburn. Now, there is an issue with pH creating some disease issues in certain potatoes. So if you have a very high soil pH, it might actually be better to be doing this with straw than with soil. You can substitute straw in your mounds. And then as far as crop rotation goes, when you are planting your potatoes, you don't want these to be going anywhere where tomatoes or peppers or eggplant, tomatillo, or other potatoes have been planted in previous seasons if those plants have had diseases, because those are all kind of related to each other. So they're going to have kind of the same pests and disease. So when it comes to harvesting your potatoes, you want to begin digging when the vines are at least half dead. So you'll begin to see the plants declining very significantly. And you want to remove your excess vines before you dig them up. That's just going to help you get down to the tubers themselves more easily. And you want to very carefully dig them up from the outside working inward. I usually use a pitchfork and I start at least 1.5 feet away from the plants and then work inward. That way you're not damaging your tubers as you pop them out of the ground. Now, your skin will be fragile on these. You are going to have to cure them, which we'll talk about in this next slide. But one thing to keep in mind with your potatoes, you do not want to wash them after you've harvested them until it's time to be cooking them, right? And that's because the soil is actually going to be preserving them in this case, and introducing more moisture to them is going to potentially introduce rot. So instead of washing, you want to brush them. So break that soil off. And then if you have something like a horsehair brush, you can just lightly brush the soil off of it. But be careful with that brush as well, because especially before they've cured, that's skin on them is going to be very fragile and it can still scrape off. And if you are doing a fall crop, you want to keep the frost dates in mind as well. You may need to actually dig them out of the ground a little bit earlier than desired because the frost will damage the plants. So you need to get it out before that. For your early or new potatoes, which are just essentially potatoes that are developing any time during the season, they're going to be smaller. They're going to have more moisture to them. You can pop those out of the ground at any point in time. You just need to, again, gently remove the plants and try your best not to damage those tubers. So as I mentioned, curing is something that is quite essential when it comes to your potatoes. You want to allow your harvest to surface dry in the sun for at least a day to toughen their skin. You can go more than a day, that's fine. Just, keep in mind that there's wildlife and other things outside that are going to want to eat your potatoes eventually. So you need to keep an eye on them. But that day in the sun is going to allow that skin to thicken up at least a little bit and give you that shell on your crop to protect them. The alternative to this is you can actually let the vines die back completely, give it about a week, and then dig them all up. And when you do that, the skins are going to toughen in the ground themselves, and you don't have to do the curing part. You can just brush them and put them in storage. When it comes to storage, you only want to be using your best quality non-damaged tubers. So if you have something that's been scratched by, say, a pitchfork, that's the stuff that you want to cut off the damage and then just eat that potato or compost it right away. As far as your good stuff, that stuff can go into your storage, and you want it to be in a cool and dark location. And typically, or preferably, it would be 45 to 50 degrees in storage. There are a lot of pests and diseases that will be incurred with potatoes. As I mentioned, there's very common ones. Your Colorado potato beetle are a problem across the country. They can be deterred with thick straw mulch, so that is an option if you were trying to keep them away. It may not, fully solve the problem, but it can at least, help mitigate them a bit. Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria that's typically used for caterpillars, actually is very effective on Colorado potato beetle as well. So that is an option. Common scab is a disease that is very common with your potatoes, and it actually gets worse with your higher pH soils. So that's what we were talking about with the mounding, and preferably using straw instead if you have a high pH. And that's because it's going to make this particular issue worse on your potatoes if you've got that high pH and you've got that disease present. If you do have this disease in your soil, then a pH of 4.8 to 5.8 is actually preferable. Potato leafhoppers are something that not just affects potatoes, but they're a very common insect or crop pests that you'll see on like alfalfa and whatnot. There's lots of pesticides that are out there. You just want to be sure you're following your labels and only applying in the early morning or later evening so that you're not affecting your pollinators. There's a lot of neonicotinoids that they say are effective on this. I'd say try to avoid those if you can because of the effects we think they may have on our pollinators. But there may be some other ones out there as well that can help you address that problem. And then early blights are another common issue, and that's a fungal disease. You'll just need to find a fungicide that is labeled for it. And some other issues. Poor tuber development can be very common with your potatoes. Hot soil is going to be a big thing about that. So remember, we like the cold soil. A way you can help mitigate this without, controlling the weather, which we unfortunately can't do. We can try mulching the soil. So that straw layer is actually going to keep your soil more moist. It's going to keep it, the temperature more regulated. And then just, regular watering for a moist, well-draining soil is going to help that out. And avoiding too much nitrogen, again, is going to help you out because you don't want all those nutrients going towards the foliage of your plants. You want it going down towards the tubers of the plants. Greening or sunburning is another issue, which you can see in this photo. And that is when the tubers themselves are just forming too close to the surface. So this is why mounding is very necessary. It covers up those plants and it prevents that chlorophyll from forming in your tubers. And those can actually be toxic if you have green forming in there. So that's something you want to avoid. I believe Chelsea will be talking about that a bit. Cracked and misshapen tubers are also very common. And that's just because of uneven soil moisture, essentially. So you may have way too much or way too little. Again, uh, mulching your soil is going to help you out with that. And then something fun to wrap this up before I let Chelsea's portion take over. Did you know that potatoes are actually an ancient crop? They are over 6,000 years old, and they originate from the Incas in Peru. Over the centuries, especially I think it was around the 1500s, they started being brought over to Europe by Spanish conquistadors. In 1589, they were actually introduced to Ireland by Walter Raleigh. So that's why it's such a prominent crop in Ireland now. And then Thomas Jefferson was actually the person that brought them over to North America. So if you look at that photo up on your top right, that is what the Incan potatoes will look like. So we have something in our chat here. Let me see. How can you grow potatoes if you have limited space? So you can try growing potatoes in a space that has, or even in, like a raised bed or say a pot. One of those things that does not work is your potato towers. They're usually not very successful at all. So you can grow the plants. Just don't try to do those, kind of gimmicky things with them. You want to supply all the nutrients and space that they need, all the lighting and water, and try to keep that even soil moisture again. And, just account for the fact that you may not be able to grow as many plants as you would otherwise, but you can definitely get by with growing these in pots or larger pots at least. Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, with that, I am going to try to switch this over to the recording of Chelsea's portion, and hopefully it all goes well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Reinberg, and I am the Nutrition Food Safety Health Agent here at Johnson County K-State Research and Extension, and I'm going to cover now the nutrition portion of potatoes. So the typical myth is that potatoes are unhealthy, but I'm here to share some information that helps you realize the health benefits and when potatoes may become unhealthy in our diet. So we certainly love our potatoes in the United States. In the United States, it's the #1 crop. Each year, people in the US consume about 110 pounds of potatoes per person, and a little more than 1/3 of all potatoes grown in the United States are manufactured into frozen products, specifically French fries, which are about 85%. The average American eats more than 4 pounds of potato chips each year as well. So why should we eat potatoes? They are budget friendly, they're nutritious, they store well, they're available all year round, and there's multiple varieties available, which kind of diversifies our diet and keeps things from getting boring. And so we'll talk about all the different types of potatoes and how we can incorporate them into our weekly meals. So a quick snapshot of potatoes. They do contain a resistant starch, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. They're a good source of potassium. They actually have more than bananas, and potassiums are really important for electrolytes. It is an electrolyte, and it's really important for keeping our heart functioning properly and a lot of other benefits. It's a good source of vitamin C, which is important for immune health, as well as keeping our whole body healthy. It's a good source of fiber, especially by keeping that skin on the outside. That's where some of the fiber is. Potatoes are a good source of nutrition. However, where we run into the trouble is what we put on our potatoes and how we cook them that makes them not so healthy for us. For example, a baked potato is typically loaded with butter, sour cream, cheese, and bacon, which all of those 4 things added to a potato is what tends to make it unhealthy. Potato chips fried in oil is obviously a little less healthy than a general baked potato with no other added toppings on top. The skin does have a lot of nutrition, so it is beneficial to keep the skins on when possible. The important thing is to make sure that we are washing them and being safe to keep the germs out of our food. So we're going to talk about that. But the skin does have nutrition and they are good to eat. So making sure that you're including them in the potato meals that you make is a good option. So potatoes can be incorporated into a balanced diet. They are higher in carbohydrates and glycemic index, which glycemic index is basically just how quickly that blood sugar rises after you eat something. Even though they are higher in carbohydrates, they do have some good benefits. Potato varieties and the cooking method does impact the glycemic index. So some varieties have a lower glycemic index. For example, sweet potatoes have a lower glycemic index than a russet potato. And the important thing is when we're eating potatoes, we want to incorporate them into a healthy diet. We want to pair them with protein and other non-starchy vegetables. So what happens is when we eat carbohydrates, it causes our blood sugar to rise. But if we pair, say, our baked potato with some Greek yogurt as a topping instead of sour cream, and have it with a side of steamed broccoli and chicken or some other type of meat, it is a well-balanced meal that is going to prevent our blood sugars from spiking. Eating just plain potatoes and ketchup, French fries is not going to keep our blood sugar from spiking. One other word of caution is potatoes may form a compound called solanine. It is a bitter chemical that can be toxic if consumed in large quantities. The downside to these is also not only is it not taste good, but it has, not only can it be toxic, but it also has a bitter flavor, which doesn't make our food taste very good. When you see green appearing in potato, it is best to throw it away. To prevent this toxin from forming, you want to store it in a cool, dry, and dark place. And then storing it, if you store it between 45 to 50 degrees, they can last up to 2 to 3 months, which is another reason why potatoes are very shelf stable and can be a great source to keep in your pantry. We want to make sure that we are cleaning our potatoes. To clean, you want to simply give them a good scrub under lukewarm water. You don't want to scrub them under cold water, like a lukewarm, not hot water will help to remove the dirt and debris better. Looking at those deep eyes and kind of deep grooves, if you have any on your potatoes, to make sure that all the dirt is out of them. You don't need to peel the potatoes unless you want to. The skin is edible, and that's where a lot of the nutrients are. Taking a scrub brush will help to get that dirt and other debris off the potatoes, and making sure they do grow on the ground, so they're going to have dirt. Even the ones you buy from the store, you think they may already be washed, but it's helpful to give them another scrub to get any remaining dirt and debris off. The other thing to remember when we talk about food safety and potatoes is that potatoes are high-risk food for foodborne illness. They're what we call a time temperature control for safety food, meaning that there has to be a certain window that the food can be left out without it becoming at risk. And same with temperature. It has to be kept within less than 40 or above 140 to be safe. A couple things that might be a surprise to you is if you've ever made baked potatoes wrapped in foil, you do not want to store those baked potatoes in foil, still wrapped, in the refrigerator. These have been found to be linked with botulism, which is a very severe illness that can result in death. There have been associated foodborne outbreaks with this type of storage of your potatoes. So if you do make baked potatoes in foil, you can certainly do that. It's the part that we want to make sure we are doing is removing that foil before storing it in the refrigerator. Don't just take it and let's say you made 6 baked potatoes in foil, but you only ate 3 of them. Don't take those potatoes still wrapped in foil and put them in the refrigerator. Go ahead, unwrap the foil, put the potatoes in another container, and put them in the refrigerator. So the types of potatoes and their uses: starchy potatoes are great for frying, baking, or mashing. Waxy potatoes, which are more of your red potatoes, are great for soup, stews, salads, scalloped potatoes. These tend to hold up better. They don't have quite as much starch, and so they don't fall apart quite as easy as your starchy potatoes, which kind of have that soft texture, which is why they make great French fries, because they can get crispy on the outside and stay nice and soft on the inside. All-purpose potatoes have less starch than starchy potatoes and hold their shape during cooking. They will work for most potato dishes. Preserving potatoes. So The important thing to know with freezing is that just raw potatoes are not going to freeze very well. You need to partially cook or fully cook your potatoes and let them cool before freezing them. This will allow them to not have that decay in kind of quality and texture. The other thing is home canning. So we have a low acid vegetable is our potatoes. And so we must pressure can these. To do this, we will wash and peel potatoes. This is the instance where you do want to peel your potatoes because since you are storing it for long periods of time, you don't want to have any risk of any bacteria getting into your canned product. So it is best to wash and peel those potatoes in the canning process. The other thing is the skins just don't hold up quite as well in the canning process. And so the quality is not going to be as good if you keep the peels on. This is optional, but most people will decide to put their potatoes in an ascorbic acid solution. And this is basically to prevent them from darkening. If you've ever had potatoes and left them out, you know that they do get a darker color. This is due to oxidation. So putting them in ascorbic acid solution will help to prevent the darkening of that. Once you do that, then you'll cut your potatoes into cubes and drain them. You're going to cook for about 2 minutes in boiling water and drain again. Or if you're doing whole potatoes, you'll boil a little bit longer. You can add salt if desired, but not necessary. And you're going to fill jars with hot prepared potatoes, and you're going to leave about a 1-inch headspace. The key here is that you're not going to use the same water you boiled your potatoes in. You're going to cover your potatoes with fresh boiling water. And then you're going to process based on the correct altitude. Russet potatoes, I think we all kind of know the basic of the russet potato. It makes great for light, fluffy mashed potatoes. And the texture is floury, dry, light, and fluffy. It has a hearty skin that is chewy when cooked. The flavor is mild and with a medium sugar content. It is best to use mashed, baked, roasted, sauteed, or fried. The nutrition is we have about 5 grams of protein, 4 grams of fiber, and as I mentioned before, it has a great source of potassium. So there is 37% of our daily recommended intake for potassium. Then we have our red potatoes. Our red potatoes are kind of another staple workhorse in our kitchen when we think about our potatoes. The texture is waxy, creamy, moist, and smooth. The texture allows it to stay firm throughout the cooking process. So that's why these work great in soups and stews because the texture is a little bit firmer, but they still get soft and stay together during the cooking process. The flavor, it's sweet, mild, and there's a medium sugar content. These also work great in salads, grilled, and as I mentioned, soups and stews. You can see that this potato has a little bit less protein and fiber than your other potato, but it also has some less carbohydrates and less calories. So again, just minor differences when we talk about the different types of potatoes, and it's not significant differences in terms of the nutrition. The major difference is going to be antioxidants. When we think about this red color, red is a very bright, it has a lot of antioxidants compared to what our brown flesh potato of our russet potato will have. So the benefit to this potato is that a little bit more antioxidant fighting power. And then there's the petite or fingerling. These come in a variety of colors. The texture is waxy and firm. These have a little bit more of a buttery, nutty, earthy flavor. If you've ever cooked with these, you'll probably notice the difference. They're a little bit more, I noticed the buttery taste compared to say the red potato or russet potato. And they also have medium sugar content. The fingerlings are a little bit longer in size than the petite ones. The petite will have a more concentrated flavor than the fingerlings. So just keeping that in mind, if you want something with a little more flavor, the little petites are great. They work well in salads, baked, roasted, sauteed. What I really like about petite and fingerling is that they are smaller, so they have less prep time. Your petite potatoes, you can either roast them whole or you can cut them in half and put them in a pot pan and roast them in the oven. So they cook quicker because they're smaller, and there's less prep because there's less cutting that has to happen. So these work really great. And again, you have a variety of colors. You get some of those antioxidants in with those purples and reds. And then, of course, you have your typical white and brown ones. Sweet potatoes are another form of potatoes. Sweet potatoes are different than what our traditional potatoes, our white potatoes are. The main difference is obviously that bright orange color. And so that bright orange color represents vitamin A. As you can see here, 1 cup of a mashed sweet potato will provide about 7 grams of fiber, some protein. But the interesting thing is that it is over 200% of our recommended daily intake for vitamin A and has about 43% of our recommended intake for manganese. So our vitamin A, we typically don't have a deficiency here in the US, and it's because we eat a lot of these vitamin A rich products like sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes were actually introduced into a lot of developing countries that had vitamin A deficiency because they're easy to grow, easy to store, and provide a lot of that vitamin A, really important for eye health and overall health. They do come in other colors besides orange, but that is the most common color that we see here. There's white sweet potatoes as well, and there are purple sweet potatoes. They have lots of other antioxidants in addition to vitamin A. And really, a sweet potato, it's sweeter than your traditional white potato, but you can prepare it in similar ways. So you can roast it, put it in salads, bake it, saute it. You can even make mashed potatoes out of your sweet potatoes as well. So there's a lot of different ways and methods you can use to cook this potato. Purple. The Peruvian varieties do have the higher starch content and a floury texture out of all the purple varieties. The purple potatoes have 2 to 3 times more antioxidants than our yellow or white, which is really important as we think about total health and having antioxidants to fight some of those free radicals and things that we're just exposed to every day. Microwave and boiling does preserve most of the nutrients. Those 2 methods are going to preserve the most. You can still roast and grill and fry, but the higher heat tends to destroy some nutrients on that. Steaming, baking are also great ways to cook those purple potatoes. The purple potatoes do have an earthy, nutty flavor. They do have a lower sugar content than all the other potatoes, so they're not going to be quite as sweet, and that texture is just going to be a little bit different. They have a mild yet distinctly nutty flavor. Of course, they have the noticeable blue-purple outer skin, and even the inside is purple. And what's great is these naturally complement that green salad flavors. So that earthy, nutty flavor goes well with salads, and also that color contrast is really pretty and makes for an appetizing and pleasing meal. But really, you can consume purple potatoes in any way that you can consume any of the other potatoes. And then we have our instant potatoes, and these probably take us back to our days of school, because this is what is mostly used in schools, as well as maybe your family has had these. And they are a staple. They are shelf staples, so they're really great to keep on the shelf when you need it. They're basically whole potatoes that have been processed to be dehydrated or instant. Most of the nutrients are retained. However, vitamin C is lost during that kind of heating and dehydrating process. The downside is some of these potatoes are going to have added sodium and a little bit less fiber because you're removing that skin. So just if you are watching sodium or preservatives, just making sure that you read the label and know that these are going to have more than what is found in a natural whole potato. They are shelf stabled, which make them great to have on hand when you really need something. The texture is dry and mealy when reconstituted, so it is best only used mashed. You can potentially use it in other ways, but mashed is going to be the best of how it is reconstituted and the way the texture is. So here I'm just going to go into a few different recipes. And so one recipe that you maybe have never tried, but you've seen it, is the Hasselback potato. And this potato does take a little bit of work to do, but it's definitely worth it. And it's just kind of a nice fancy treat for a different way to make a potato. So this works best with the russet potatoes. You take your russet potatoes, clean them, bake them, and then what you're going to do is just clean them. And before you bake them, you're going to cut them. And so what I like to do is you could either take 2 chopsticks, or what also works is 2 straws. And you're going to put the potato between those straws, because that is going to help you from cutting all the way through the potato. These potatoes, as you can kind of see in the picture, are not cut all the way through. There's a very, very thin bottom piece that's holding it all together. So you're going to create all these little cuts. You're going to put some butter in between them, or olive oil. You're going to bake them until they're tender and brown. And then you're going to top them. You're going to add some cheddar cheese if you wish in between. You certainly can leave out the cheese. And then you're going to top them with a little bit more and bake them. And the great thing is a healthier alternative to our sour creams, as I said, is non-fat plain Greek yogurt. And then, of course, you can use turkey bacon or any other type of substitute on top. It's one of those things where if it's a treat, you can do this in moderation. Now, if you're eating Hasselbacks, or if you're eating baked potatoes loaded with butter, sour cream, and bacon every night, that's when it becomes a problem. It's never to say that you can never eat baked potatoes with butter, sour cream, and bacon, or that you can't have these Hasselback potatoes with bacon and cheese. It's just the moderation piece. And we want to incorporate other fruits and vegetables. So again, you're having these potatoes, incorporate a lean protein, and having a non-starchy vegetable like roasted asparagus or Brussels sprouts, or even broccoli would be a good option. And then another way, sweet potatoes are great because I feel like sweet potatoes can be used in a lot of other non-traditional ways for using potatoes. Because of their kind of more sweet flavor, they go really well in biscuits. Here's a sweet potato biscuit recipe that's just, again, a different take on it. There's also a sweet potato like bread that works really well. It's a quick rise bread, so think of like a banana bread, except you're using sweet potato, it kind of reminds me of a pumpkin bread with all the flavors. But here's the recipe for the sweet potato biscuits. This does use whole wheat flour, so you're getting a little bit more extra protein. You have some of the benefits, the nutrition benefits from the sweet potato, and the directions are there. So the slides will be, so the PowerPoints and the recordings will be circulated around. So you will be able to see this recipe again, or take a quick little screenshot of it if you would like to try to make it. And then the last one is mashed potatoes, the go-to standard that everybody loves are mashed potatoes. But here's just a different take on it. So using a Yukon Gold potato, again, these are another great option for a mashed potato compared to a russet potato. So you have your Yukon Gold potatoes, you have some garlic, and then what we're using here is we're using a low-fat feta cheese. And so that low-fat feta cheese is just going to be a different flavor profile than your typical cheddar cheese. And the nice thing about feta, like a soft cheese like feta or goat cheese, is that it's going to have a little bit less lactose. So if you can't typically handle lactose, this is a good option, and it's going to have some less fat. So for the milk that's used, you can definitely use a milk alternative as well, or any type of low fat or 2% milk. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. And there we have our In Good Health newsletter as well. So if you sign up, you will receive a monthly e-newsletter from us with a recipe of the month, as well as some tips and tricks and other topics. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. All right, well, while we wrap up here, are there any other questions that I am able to answer? I'm not going to be too helpful with the nutrition ones, but if you have any more questions about growing potatoes, I am available. Well, thank you so much for your time, everybody. Be sure to tune in next month. We'll get the information out soon, but our next topic for Dig Your Dinner is going to be all about onions. So yeah, it's going to be this about onions. We'll see you there.